This new app is Child's Play, the latest from podnews.net with co-host, powerful podcast hosting for agencies and brands. A new podcast app for kids has been launched. Kids Pod includes more than 300 shows and an in-app colouring book. It's claimed to be the first of its kind to present over 300 kids podcasts in a visual, intuitive and safe way. Acast is to work with Danish podcast studio Podster. The first show they're working on, a true crime podcast, has already been a success in Sweden. A takedown order against The Trial, a true crime podcast in New Zealand from Stuff, has failed in the country's High Court. It's the first time a takedown order has been sought against a podcast in the country. Justice Jonathan Eaton said he was not satisfied the podcast was likely to create a real risk of prejudice. A retrial is scheduled on October the 21st. Voltage has launched 2 high-profile podcasts on Substack. 2 of the biggest obstacles facing independent podcasters, suggests J.E. Peterson, are audience, engagement and monetization. And Substack is fantastic at both things. YouTube announced easier access to the YouTube Partner Program with lower eligibility criteria. It unlocks monetization options. PRX is to distribute 2 radio shows and podcasts to more public radio stations. KCRW's Left, Right and Centre, and no small endeavour. In Singapore, media organisation MediaCorp is holding a podcast talent hunt competition with a 5,000 Singaporean dollar top prize for people aged 15 to 25. The Australian ABC writes about Meghan and Harry's podcast deal and has all the best industry commentators. We link to that today. And Entail, a visually augmented podcast app, no longer seems to have a working website, and its app is not available. The company was acquired by the Daily Mail General Trust in November 2021. None of its socials have been updated since. In People News, Shanta Covington has been named co-executive producer for Our Body Politics. She joins from WNYC. And in podcast news, Vox Media's Criminal has launched Criminal Plus, a subscription product that will offer additional benefits, including a quarterly subscriber-only virtual event, free and discounted merchandise, and more. Rap Radar has Joe Budden as a guest. Budden, who's called the Podfather throughout the show, says he turned down a $20 million Spotify deal, thought the Joe Budden podcast was the dumbest name for a podcast in the world, and that a misconception about podcasts is that everyone is just swimming in money. Nikki Boyer created the podcast Dying for Sex, which was named Podcast of the Year by the Ambies, in a new podcast, Near Death. She's introducing us to Reverend Peggy, who's been present for the final moments of nearly 2,000 people. A lead chaplain at one of the world's most renowned hospitals, Peggy shares with Nikki the most riveting end-of-life stories from her 20-year career in spiritual care, with one goal in mind: to help everyone be a little less afraid of death. Other new podcasts include The Two Matts, new this week, with the founder of The New European, Matt Kelly, and Matt Dancona, the New European's editor-at-large. It's being produced by Matt Hill of Rethink Audio. Smartless Media and Wondery have launched a Will and Grace rewatch podcast, Just Jack and Will, with Sean Hayes and Eric McCormack. And Shred with Shifty is new from Double Elvis, Volume and Premier Guitar. It's hosted by Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee and longtime member of the Foo Fighters, Chris Shiflett, who sits down with a legendary guitarist and aims to answer a singular question: how did you do that? Each guitarist will give rare insight into the art of the guitar solo. This podcast is sponsored by Co-Host and Quill. Agencies and brands need better podcast analytics. Discover companies that listen to your podcast, where downloads are coming from, and how listeners are resonating with Co-Host, cohostpodcasting.com. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.